back. This is chapter 5 of The Revolt of the Angels by Anatole France, wherein everything seems strange, because everything is logical. The Chapel of the Holy Angels, which lies on the right hand as you enter the church of Saint-Sulpice, was hidden behind a scaffolding of planks. Abbé Batouille, Monsieur Gaeton, Monsieur Maurice, his nephew, and Monsieur Sariette entered in single file through the low door cut in the wooden hoarding and found old Guinardon on the top of his ladder standing in front of the Heliodorus. The old artist, surrounded by all sorts of tools and materials, was putting a white paste in the crack which cut in two the high priest Onias, Zephyrine, Paul Baldry's favorite model, Zephyrine, who had lent her golden hair and polished shoulders to so many Magdalens, Marguerites, sylphs, and mermaids, and who, it is said, was beloved of the Emperor Napoleon III, was standing at the foot of the ladder with tangled locks, cadaverous cheeks, and dim eyes, older than old Guinardon, whose life she had shared for more than half a century. She had brought the painter's lunch in a basket. Although the slanting rays fell gray and cold to the leaded and iron-barred window, Delacroix's coloring shone resplendent, and the roses on the cheeks of men and angels dimmed with their glorious beauty the rubicund countenance of old Guinardon, which stood out in relief against one of the temple's columns. These frescoes of the Chapel of the Holy Angels, though derided and insulted when they first appeared, have now become part of the classic tradition and are united in immortality with the masterpieces of Rubens and Tintoretto. Old Guinardon, bearded and long-haired, looked like Father Time effacing the works of man's genius. Gaeton, in alarm, called out to him, "Carefully, Monsieur Guinardon, carefully, do not scrape too much." The painter reassured him, "Fear nothing, Monsieur Gaeton. I do not paint in that style. My art is a higher one. I work after the manner of Cimabue, Giotto, and Beato Angelico, not in the style of Delacroix. This surface here is too heavily charged with contrast and opposition to give a really sacred effect. It is true that Quenevard said that Christianity loves the picturesque, but Quenevard was a rascal with neither faith nor principle, an infidel. Look, Monsieur d'Esparvieu, I fill up the crevice. I relay the scales of paint which are peeling. That is all. The damage due to the sinking of the wall, or more probably to a seismic shock, is confined to a very small place. This painting of oil and wax applied on a very dry foundation is far more solid than one might think. I saw Delacroix engaged on this work, impassioned but anxious. He modeled feverishly, scraped out, repainted unceasingly. His mighty hand made childish blunders, but the thing is done with the mastery of a genius and the inexperience of a schoolboy. It is a marvel how it holds." The good man was silent and went on filling in the crevice. "How classic and traditional the composition is," said Gaeton. "Time was when one could recognize nothing but its amazing novelty. Now one can see it in a multitude of old Italian formulas. I may allow myself the luxury of being just. I possess the qualifications," said the old man from the top of his lofty ladder. "Delacroix lived in a blasphemous and godless age, a painter of the decadence. He was not without pride nor grandeur. He was greater than his times, but he lacked faith, single-heartedness, and purity. To be able to see and paint angels, he needed that virtue of angels and primitives, that supreme virtue which, with God's help, I do my best to practice. Chastity. Hold your tongue, Michel. You are as big a brute as any of them." Thus, Zephyrine, devoured with jealousy because that very morning on the stairs she had seen her lover kiss the bread woman's daughter, to wit, the youthful Octavie, who was as squalid and radiant as one of Rembrandt's brides. She had loved Michel madly in the happy days long since past, and love had never died out in Zephyrine's heart. Old Guinardon received the flattering insult with a smile that he dissembled and raised his eyes to the ceiling, where the Archangel Michael, terrible in azure cuirass and gilt helmet, was springing heavenwards in all the radiance of his glory. Meanwhile, Abbé Patouille, blinking and shielding his eyes with his hat against the glaring light from the window, began to examine the pictures one after another. Heliodorus being scourged by the angels, Saint Michael vanquishing the demons, and the combat of Jacob and the angel. "All this is exceedingly fine," he murmured at last, "but why is the artist only represented wrathful angels on these walls? Look where I will in this chapel, I see but heralds of celestial anger, ministers of divine vengeance. God wishes to be feared. He wishes also to be loved. I would fain perceive on these walls messengers of peace and of clemency. I should like to see the seraphim who purified the lips of the prophet, Saint Raphael, who gave back his sight to old Tobias, Gabriel, who announced the mystery of the Incarnation to Mary, the angel who delivered Saint Peter from his chains, the cherubim who bore the dead Saint Catherine to the top of Sinai. Above all, I should like to be able to contemplate those heavenly guardians which God gives to every man baptized in his name. We each have one who follows all our steps, who comforts us and upholds us. It would be pleasant indeed to admire these enchanting spirits, these beautiful faces." "Ah, Abbé, it depends on the point of view," answered Gaeton. "Delacroix was no sentimentalist. Old Ingres was not very far wrong in saying that this great man's work reeks of fire and brimstone. Look at the somber, splendid beauty of those angels. Look at those androgynes so proud and fierce, at those pitiless youths who lift avenging rods against Heliodorus. Note this mysterious wrestler touching the patriarch on the hip. Hush!" said Abbé Patouille. "According to the Bible, he is no angel like the others. If he be an angel, he is the angel of creation, the eternal Son of God. I am surprised that the venerable curé of Saint-Sulpice, who entrusted the decoration of this chapel to Monsieur Eugene Delacroix, did not tell him that the patriarch's symbolic struggle with him, who is nameless, took place in profound darkness, and that the subject is quite out of place here, since it prefigures the incarnation of Jesus Christ. The best artists go astray when they fail to obtain their ideas of Christian iconography from a qualified ecclesiastic. The institutions of Christian art form the subject of numerous works with which you are doubtless acquainted, Monsieur Sariette." Monsieur Sariette was gazing vacantly about him. It was the third morning after his adventurous night in the library. Being, however, thus called upon by the venerable ecclesiastic, he pulled himself together and replied, "On this subject we may with advantage consult Molanus, De Historia Sacrarum Imaginum et Picturarum, in the edition given us by Noel Paquot, dated Louvain 1771, Cardinal Federico Borromeo, De Pictura Sacra, and the Iconography of Diderot, but this last work must be read with caution." Having thus spoken, Monsieur Sariette relapsed into silence. He was pondering on his devastated library. "On the other hand," continued Abbé Patouille, "since an example of the holy anger of the angels was necessary in this chapel, the painter is to be commended for having depicted for us, in imitation of Raphael, the heavenly messengers who chastised Heliodorus. Ordered by Seleucus, king of Syria, to carry off the treasures contained in the temple, Heliodorus was stricken by an angel in a cuirass of gold, mounted on a magnificently caparisoned steed. 2 other angels smote him with rods. He fell to earth, as Monsieur Delacroix shows us here, and was swallowed up in darkness. It is right and salutary that this adventure should be cited as an example to the Republican commissioners of police and to the sacrilegious agents of the law. There will always be Heliodoruses, but let it be known, every time they lay their hands on the property of the church, which is the property of the poor, they shall be chastised with rods and blinded by the angels. I should like this painting, or better still, Raphael's sublimer conception of the same subject, to be engraved in little pictures, fully colored, and distributed as rewards in all the schools." "Uncle," said young Maurice with a yawn, "I think these things are simply ghastly. I prefer Matisse and Metzinger." These words fell unheeded, and old Guinardon from his ladder held forth, Only the primitives caught a glimpse of heaven. Beauty is only to be found between the 13th and 15th centuries. The antique, the impure antique, which regained its pernicious influence over the minds of the 16th century, inspired poets and painters with criminal notions and immodest conceptions, with horrid impurities. Filth! All the artists of the Renaissance were swine, including Michelangelo. Then, perceiving the Gaëtan was on the point of departure, Père Guinardon assumed an air of bonhomie and said to him in a confidential tone, "Monsieur Gaëtan, if you're not afraid of climbing up my 5 flights, come and have a look in my den. I've got 2 or 3 little canvases I wouldn't mind parting with, and they might interest you. All good, honest, straightforward stuff. I'll show you, among other things, a tasty, spicy little Baldwin that would make your mouth water." At this speech, Gaëtan made off. As he descended the church steps and turned down the Rue Princesse, he found himself accompanied by old Sariette, and fell to unburdening himself to him, as he would have done to any human creature, or indeed to a tree, a lamppost, a dog, or even his own shadow, of the indignation with which the aesthetic theories of the old painter inspired him. Old Guinardon overdoes it with his Christian art and his primitives. Whatever the artist conceives of heaven is borrowed from earth. God, the Virgin, the angels, men and women, saints, the light, the clouds. When he was designing figures for the chapel windows at Dreux, old Ingres drew from life a pure, fine study of a woman, which may be seen, among many others, in the Musée Bonnat at Bayonne. Old Ingres had written at the bottom of the page, in case he should forget, Mademoiselle Cécile, admirable legs and thighs. And so as to make Mademoiselle Cécile into a saint in paradise, he gave her a robe, a cloak, a veil, inflicting thus a shameful decline in her estate, for the tissues of lions and Genois are worthless compared with the youthful living tissue. Rosy with pure blood, the most beautiful draperies are despicable compared with the lines of a beautiful body. In fact, clothing for flesh that is desirable and ripe for wedlock is an unmerited shame, and the worst of humiliations. And Gaëtan, walking carelessly in the gutter of the Rue Garancier, continued, Old Guinardon is a pestilential idiot. He blasphemes antiquity, sacred antiquity, the age when the gods were kind. He exalts an epoch when the painter and the sculptor had all their lessons to learn over again. In point of fact, Christianity has run contrary to art insomuch as it has not favored the study of the nude. Art is the representation of nature, and nature is preeminently the human body. It is the nude. Pardon, purred old Sariette. There is such a thing as spiritual, or as one might term it, inward beauty, which, since the days of Fra Angelico down to those of Hippolyte Flandrine, Christian art has. But Gaëtan, never hearing a word of all this, went on hurling his impetuous observations at the stones of the old street and the snow-laden clouds overhead. The primitives cannot be judged as a whole, for they are utterly unlike each other. The old madman confounds them all together. Cimabue is a corrupt Byzantine. Giotto gives hints of powerful genius, but his modeling is bad, and, like children, he gives all his characters the same face. The early Italians have grace and joy, because they are Italians. The Venetians have an instinct for fine color, but when all is said and done, these exquisite craftsmen enamel and gild rather than paint. There's far too much softness about the heart and the coloring of your saintly Angelico for me. As for the Flemish school, that's quite another pair of shoes. They can use their hands, and in glory of workmanship, they're on a level with the Chinese lacquer workers. The technique of the brothers Van Eyck is a marvel, but I cannot discover in their adoration of the Lamb the charm and mystery that some have vaunted. Everything in it is treated with a pitiless perfection. It is vulgar in feeling and cruelly ugly. Memling may touch one perhaps, but he creates nothing but sick wretches and cripples. Under the heavy, rich, and ungraceful robing of his virgins and saints, one divines some very lamentable anatomy. I did not wait for Roger Van Weyden to call himself Roger de la Pasture and turn Frenchman in order to prefer him to Memling. This Roger or Roger is less of a ninny, but then he's more lugubrious, and the rigidity of his lines bears eloquent testimony to his poverty-stricken figures. It's a strange perversion to take pleasures in these carnivalesque figures when one can have the paintings of Leonardo, Titian, Correggio, Velázquez, Rubens, Rembrandt, Poussin, or Proudhon. Really, it is a perverted instinct. Meanwhile, the Abbé Patouille and Maurice d'Esparvieu were strolling leisurely along in the wake of the aesthete and the librarian. As a general rule, the Abbé Patouille was little inclined to talk theology with laymen, or for that matter, with clerics either. Carried away, however, by the attractiveness of the subject, he was telling the youthful Maurice all about the sacred mission of those guardian angels which Monsieur Delacroix had so inopportunely excluded from his picture. And in order to give more adequate expression to his thoughts on such lofty themes, the Abbé Patouille borrowed whole phrases and sentences from Bossuet. He had gotten them up by heart to put in his sermons, for he adhered strongly to tradition. "Yes, my son," he was saying, "God has appointed tutelary spirits to be near us. They come to us laden with His gifts. They return laden with our prayers. Such is their task. Not an hour, not a moment passes, but they are at our side, ready to help us, ever fervent and unwearying guardians, watchmen that never slumber." "Quite so, Abbé," murmured Maurice, who was wondering by what cunning artifice he could get on the soft side of his mother and persuade her to give him some money, of which he was urgently in need. That was certainly a long one. This was chapter 5 of The Revolt of the Angels by Anatole France. If you want to hear chapters 6 and beyond, please do continue listening on the playlist or click onto my channel and find it there. Thank you very much.